The air in the Senate chamber tasted like thunder. Every eye in the room locked on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as she rose from her seat, her crimson blazer cutting through the sea of navy and charcoal suits like a blade through fog. In her hand, she held a manila envelope, yellowed, frayed at the edges, stamped with faded ink that read, "Confidential, Wharton School Admissions, Kennedy, J.N., 1970. The rustle of paper echoed louder than it should have. Somewhere in the back row, a phone buzzed. A journalist leaned forward. A senator's pen froze mid-note. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Mr. President," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I rise today not out of anger, but out of necessity." Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat 3 rows back, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, his trademark smirk nowhere to be found. His hands, usually animated with folksy gestures, rested flat on the desk in front of him. He didn't blink. Behind him, Republican colleagues exchanged glances. Something was wrong. "For years," Crockett continued, "we've watched as Senator Kennedy has wielded his so-called intellectual superiority like a weapon. He's dismissed experts. He's mocked witnesses. He's questioned the intelligence of his colleagues, particularly women, particularly people of color, all while hiding behind a carefully crafted persona of the Oxford-educated genius who chooses to speak like a common man." She paused. The silence was suffocating. "Well, today, the American people are going to learn the truth about that genius." Cameras zoomed in. C-SPAN anchors whispered urgently into their microphones. Twitter, now X, exploded with real-time speculation. Crockett held the envelope higher. "What I have here is Senator Kennedy's actual aptitude assessment from the Wharton School of Business, taken in 1970 as part of his application process. It includes his test scores, his first-year academic records, and the recommendation, or lack thereof, from his academic advisors." Kennedy's face drained of color. "This document," Crockett said, her voice rising now, "tells a very different story than the one Senator Kennedy has been selling to the American people for decades." She opened the envelope. The chamber erupted. To understand what happened in that chamber, you have to understand the 2 people at the center of it. John Kennedy, the folksy genius. John Neely Kennedy was a political shapeshifter. At 72 years old, the senior senator from Louisiana had perfected the art of duality. On Fox News, he spoke with a thick Southern drawl, delivering one-liners that lit up conservative Twitter. "I'd rather drink weed killer than vote for this bill." In Senate hearings, he played the humble country lawyer, prefacing sharp questions with phrases like, "Now, I may just be a simple country boy, but—" But when it suited him, Kennedy dropped the act. He'd lean back in his chair, adjust his glasses, and remind everyone in the room that he'd studied at Oxford University, that he held a law degree from the University of Virginia, that his mind had been sharpened in the halls of elite institutions most Americans would never see. It was a brilliant political strategy. Appear relatable to the base, but intellectually untouchable to opponents. And for decades, it worked. Kennedy used his claimed intellectual authority to bulldoze through hearings. He'd interrupt witnesses mid-sentence, condescend to Nobel laureates, and dismiss data-driven arguments with a wave of his hand and a smirk. "Bless your heart," he'd say to a female economist, "but what we learned at Oxford contradicts your little theory." His constituents loved it. His colleagues feared it. His opponents had no answer for it. Jasmine Crockett, the truth seeker. Jasmine Felicia Crockett didn't come to Washington to make friends. The 43-year-old freshman congresswoman from Texas had built her career on one principle: speak truth, no matter the cost. Before Congress, she was a civil rights attorney in Dallas, defending the underrepresented, taking on cases no one else would touch. She didn't chase headlines. She chased justice. And when she arrived in Washington, she brought that same fire with her. Crockett didn't play the game the way others did. She didn't soften her edges or code switch for white audiences. She wore bold colors, electric blues, blazing reds, and spoke with unapologetic clarity. In her first year, she became a social media sensation, dismantling conservative talking points with surgical precision. But she never did it for the virality. She did it because she believed in something deeper, that truth matters, that power built on lies will eventually crumble, that the voices of the marginalized deserve to be heard and respected. And when John Kennedy dismissed her intelligence on national television, calling her just another Democrat who thinks she's smarter than everyone else, something inside her shifted. She didn't get angry, she got methodical. The tension between Kennedy and Crockett had been building for months. It started in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing where Crockett was testifying on voting rights legislation. She'd spent hours preparing, citing Supreme Court precedents, statistical analyses, and constitutional law. Kennedy interrupted her 3 minutes in. "Now, little lady," he drawled, leaning into his microphone with that signature smirk, "I know numbers can be hard, but let's try to stick to the facts here." The room went silent. Crockett stared at him, her jaw tight. She didn't flinch. She didn't explode. She simply continued her testimony, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But the clip went viral. Conservative media celebrated Kennedy for putting her in her place. Progressive outlets raged at the sexism and condescension. And Crockett, watching the clip loop endlessly on cable news, made herself a promise. This man will never dismiss me or anyone else again. The next day, Kennedy doubled down on Fox News. These Democrats come in with their fancy degrees, thinking that makes them experts on everything, he said, his drawl thick as molasses. Ms. Crockett might want to worry less about impressing us with big words and more about understanding how the real world works. He tapped his temple and winked at the camera. Not everyone can be a genius. That was the moment Crockett decided to dig. Crockett's chief of staff, Marcus Johnson, had connections. He'd worked in educational policy for years before joining her team, and he knew something most people didn't. Academic records from the 1970s weren't protected the same way modern records are. "If there's a legitimate legislative purpose," Marcus told her over coffee one morning, "we might be able to access historical archives, especially for public officials who've made their educational credentials a cornerstone of their public persona." Crockett leaned forward. "You're saying we could find out if Kennedy's Genius Act is real?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm saying it's worth exploring." It took 3 months. 3 months of legal consultations, archival requests, and quiet negotiations with the University of Pennsylvania. 3 months of late nights, FOIA requests, and strategic maneuvering. But eventually, the envelope arrived. And when Crockett opened it, she knew. This was going to change everything. To understand the magnitude of what Crockett was about to do, you have to understand what John Kennedy had built. His entire political identity rested on a single, carefully constructed myth, that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. And he wielded that myth like a weapon. Over the years, Kennedy had perfected the art of intellectual intimidation. In Senate hearings, he didn't just ask questions, he performed dominance. When Dr. Emily Chen, a leading OB/GYN with 30 years of experience, testified before the Judiciary Committee on Reproductive Health Care, Kennedy interrupted her halfway through her opening statement. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure your medical training was adequate, but what you're describing here contradicts basic biology, something we studied quite extensively at Oxford." Dr. Chen, stunned, tried to respond. Kennedy cut her off. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your understanding of this issue is quaint, but simplistic." The clip went viral among conservative circles. "Kennedy destroys woke doctor," the headlines read. But for Dr. Chen, it was humiliating, degrading, and completely unfair. Kennedy used the same tactic on his colleagues. During a banking committee hearing, Senator Elizabeth Warren challenged Kennedy's understanding of credit default swaps. He leaned back in his chair, grinned, and said, "Senator Warren, even with your Harvard credentials, you're missing what any first-year economics student at Oxford would understand." Warren, one of the nation's leading economic scholars, sat in stunned silence. Kennedy's allies laughed, his opponents fumed, but no one could touch him. Because how do you argue with someone who claims intellectual superiority and hides behind elite credentials? You can't, unless those credentials are a lie. The week before Crockett's revelation, Kennedy appeared on Tucker Carlson Tonight. The host teed him up perfectly. "Senator, Democrats keep pushing these so-called experts in front of Congress. What do you make of their arguments?" Kennedy chuckled, his drawl thick. "Well, Tucker, I'll tell you, these folks come in with their degrees and their fancy data, and they think that makes them smarter than the rest of us. But you don't need an Oxford education like mine to see the stupidity of their proposals." He leaned into the camera. "Take Jasmine Crockett, for example. Bright young woman, I'm sure, but she thinks her law degree makes her an expert on everything. It doesn't. Real wisdom comes from experience and humility." The audience applauded. Carlson grinned, and Crockett, watching from her office, smiled, because she knew something they didn't. What made Kennedy's act so dangerous wasn't just the arrogance, it was the hypocrisy. He presented himself as a man of the people, a humble country lawyer who just happened to have an elite education. But in reality, he used that education as a cudgel to silence dissent. He spoke with a Southern drawl to his constituents, but dropped it entirely in academic settings. He claimed to value common sense over elitism, but constantly reminded people of his Ivy League pedigree. He positioned himself as a truth-teller, but built his entire persona on a foundation of performance. And now, Jasmine Crockett was about to expose it all. The moment Crockett opened the envelope, the chamber fell silent. She didn't rush. She let the tension build. "For those who can't see from where they're sitting," she said calmly, "I've prepared a visual aid." A staff member wheeled out a large poster board. On it, a graph. Wharton School Aptitude Assessment, 1970, Applicant Comparison. A red line, labeled J.N. Kennedy, dipped far below the average. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Crockett pointed to the chart. "Senator Kennedy," she began, "scored in the 27th percentile overall on the Wharton Aptitude Assessment. That means 73% of applicants that year performed better than he did." Kennedy's face turned ashen. "His lowest scores," Crockett continued, "were in quantitative reasoning and logical analysis, the very areas he now claims expertise in when dismissing economic policy proposals." She flipped to another board. "Let me read directly from the Admissions Committee's notes." The chamber was dead silent. "Candidate Kennedy demonstrates below-average aptitude for business studies, particularly in quantitative fields. Admission not recommended on academic merits alone. Consider legacy status and family connections." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Crockett wasn't done. She revealed another poster. Kennedy's first-year transcript from Wharton. Introductory Economics, D. Business Analytics, C. Calculus, with drawn cumulative. GPA 1.9. "Senator Kennedy," Crockett said, her voice steady, "spent exactly 1 year at Wharton before transferring to Vanderbilt. His official story has always been that he sought a more well-rounded education." She paused. "But the records tell a different story." She read from another document, Kennedy's academic advisor's transfer recommendation letter. "While Mr. Kennedy has struggled considerably with the quantitative requirements of our business curriculum, he demonstrates stronger aptitude for humanities and social sciences. A liberal arts environment where mathematical reasoning is less emphasized may better suit his natural abilities." The room erupted. Kennedy finally found his voice. This is nothing but a political hit job," he shouted, his Southern drawl vanishing entirely. Old test scores don't define anyone's career." Crockett turned to face him directly. "I agree completely, Senator." Kennedy blinked, thrown off. Test scores from 50 years ago shouldn't define anyone. That's exactly my point. She stepped closer to the microphone. "You've used claimed intellectual superiority, supposedly backed by your academic credentials, to dismiss and demean countless witnesses and colleagues. You wielded your education as both a sword and a shield." Her voice rose. "If those claims were built on a foundation of misrepresentation, the American people deserve to know." Crockett displayed another board, a compilation of Kennedy's most condescending moments. Clips played on screens around the chamber. Kennedy telling Dr. Chen her medical expertise was quaint but simplistic. Kennedy dismissing Senator Warren's economic analysis. Kennedy mocking a climate scientist's data as something any Oxford grad could debunk. Each clip was followed by a freeze frame of his academic records. D in economics, C in business analytics, bottom 27th percentile. The contrast was devastating. Crockett turned back to the chamber. "This isn't about embarrassing Senator Kennedy," she said, her voice softer now but no less powerful. "This is about honesty in public service." She looked directly at him. "Senator, you're clearly an intelligent man. You've had a successful career. Your Oxford degree and law license are real accomplishments." She paused. "But you didn't need to fabricate intellectual superiority. You didn't need to weaponize false credentials to silence others." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "The people of Louisiana elected you for who you are, not for who you pretended to be." The chamber was silent. Kennedy sat frozen, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. And Jasmine Crockett, standing tall in her crimson blazer, had just changed the rules of the game. The explosion was immediate. Within minutes, Ask Genius, Think Again was trending worldwide. Cable news networks cut to breaking coverage. Political analysts scrambled to process what had just happened. And across America, millions of people watched the same clip on repeat. John Kennedy, the self-proclaimed genius, exposed as a man who had built his career on a lie. CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his show that night with a sobering monologue. For years, Senator John Kennedy has positioned himself as an intellectual force in American politics. Tonight, we learned that persona may have been built on a foundation of sand. He played clips of Kennedy's most condescending moments, each one now recontextualized by Crockett's revelations. "This isn't just about test scores," Cooper said. "This is about truth in public service. And the question we all have to ask ourselves is, how many other political personas are built on similar fabrications?" Fox News took a different approach. Tucker Carlson opened his show with fury. "What we witnessed today was nothing short of a political assassination," he declared. "Congresswoman Crockett invaded Senator Kennedy's privacy, weaponized decades-old academic records, and destroyed a man's reputation, all for political gain." But even Carlson couldn't fully defend the substance of the revelations. "Look," he admitted, "maybe Kennedy exaggerated his academic record. Maybe he played up the genius thing a little too much. But does that really matter?" The answer for millions of Americans was yes. Twitter, now X, was on fire. Truth in politics. John Kennedy spent years dismissing women and POC as intellectually inferior. Turns out he was the one struggling academically. Genius, Think Again, in conservative voice. 22. "This is disgusting. Crockett should be censured for this invasion of privacy." Stand with Kennedy, art data-driven Dem. Kennedy told a Nobel Prize-winning economist she was wrong because of his Oxford training. He got a D in Econ 101. Let that sink in. One clip, in particular, went mega-viral. A side-by-side comparison of Kennedy's accent. On the left, Kennedy speaking to Fox News, his drawl thick and exaggerated. On the right, Kennedy in a university lecture, speaking in crisp, standard American English. The caption, "Which John Kennedy is real?" It had 18 million views in 24 hours. Kennedy's Republican colleagues were in damage control mode. Senator Lindsey Graham, usually one of Kennedy's closest allies, offered only a tepid defense. "John's a good man who served Louisiana well. I'll let him address these matters himself." Senator Mitt Romney was blunter. "Honesty matters in public service. We should present ourselves truthfully." Even Mitch McConnell, the master of party discipline, stayed silent. The message was clear. Kennedy was on his own. But the most powerful responses came from the people Kennedy had spent years dismissing. Dr. Emily Chen, the OB/GYN Kennedy had mocked, appeared on MSNBC. For years, Senator Kennedy used his so-called Oxford education to dismiss my expertise, she said, her voice steady but emotional. "I've spent 3 decades studying reproductive medicine. I've published over 100 peer-reviewed papers, but he treated me like I didn't know what I was talking about." She paused. Now we know he was the one who struggled academically, and yet he felt entitled to dismiss me. Her voice broke. "That's not just arrogance. That's weaponized mediocrity." Senator Elizabeth Warren released a statement. "For too long, Senator Kennedy has used his claimed intellectual authority to shut down policy debates. He's questioned the expertise of economists, scientists, and legal scholars, particularly women and people of color. Today, we learned that his authority was built on a lie. It's time for a more honest, more substantive discourse in Washington." In her first interview after the revelation, Crockett appeared on CBS with Norah O'Donnell. "Do you have any regrets?" O'Donnell asked. Crockett paused, choosing her words carefully. "My only regret," she said, "is that such a drastic step was necessary to address a pattern of behavior that's been silencing expert voices, particularly from women and people of color, for years." She leaned forward. "This wasn't about embarrassing Senator Kennedy. It was about challenging a system that allows claimed intellectual superiority to override substantive debate. You," O'Donnell pressed, "some say you invaded his privacy for political gain." Crockett's eyes flashed. "I revealed information directly relevant to claims Senator Kennedy has made repeatedly in official proceedings. He used his supposed genius to dismiss expert testimony and shut down policy debates. That's not private. That's central to his public role." She paused. "The American people deserve to know if that role is based on truth or performance." Back in Louisiana, Kennedy's constituents were divided. A poll conducted 3 days after the revelation showed his approval rating had dropped from 61% to 47%, a significant but not fatal decline. Some remained loyal. "I don't care about test scores from 50 years ago," one voter told a local news station. "John's done right by Louisiana. That's what matters." But others felt betrayed. "I always liked how he seemed smart but talked like us," another voter said. "Finding out he might not be as smart as he claimed? That feels like we've been played." 6 weeks after the revelation, something unexpected happened. John Kennedy and Jasmine Crockett found themselves alone in a Capitol elevator. The doors closed. Silence. Then Kennedy spoke. "That was quite a show you put on, Congresswoman." His accent was different now, softer, less performative. Crockett met his gaze. "It wasn't meant to be a show, Senator. It was meant to be a correction." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Well, correction noted." He looked down. "I suppose we all create versions of ourselves in this business." Crockett's voice was firm, but not unkind. "The difference, Senator, is whether those versions elevate the discourse or diminish it, whether they open doors for more voices or slam them shut." The elevator dinged. Crockett stepped out, then turned back. "Your folksy persona was never the problem. It was using claimed intellectual superiority to silence others while hiding behind that folksiness." She paused. "I hope we can both do better going forward." The doors closed. In the months that followed, something shifted in Washington. Committee hearings became more substantive. Fewer senators used their credentials as weapons. More voices, particularly those of women and people of color, were heard and respected. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Kennedy remained in the Senate, but his persona had changed. Gone were the exaggerated drawls and folksy put-downs. In their place, straightforward questions, policy-focused debates, and, occasionally, genuine humility. He never apologized publicly, but his behavior spoke louder than words ever could. Crockett, meanwhile, became a national figure. She used her platform not to attack, but to elevate. In speeches across the country, she returned again and again to the same theme. Truth matters, authenticity matters, and every voice, no matter who it belongs to, deserves to be heard. On a rainy afternoon in Washington, 6 months after the revelation, a young congressional intern posted a TikTok video that captured the moment perfectly. "What I learned that day," she said, looking directly into the camera, "is that the most revolutionary act in Washington isn't exposing someone's past." She paused. "It's demanding honesty in their present." The video went viral because it captured a truth that transcended politics. Power built on lies will always crumble, but truth, spoken with courage, will always endure. And so, in the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose John Kennedy's academic record. She exposed a system that had allowed performative authority to override substance for far too long. She challenged the idea that credentials matter more than character. And she reminded the nation that real intelligence isn't about where you went to school. It's about how you use your voice. If this story moved you, if it made you think about truth, power, and the voices that get silenced, then, like this video, share it and subscribe. Because in a world where performance often trumps authenticity, stories like this matter. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, always deserves witnesses.